We're continuing with our reading of the Srimad Bhagavatam. We're on Canto 4, Chapter 2. We're taking up where we left off, and that would bring us to text number 28. I'm on page 71 in my book. Om Jnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuran Militam Dena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. One who takes a vow to satisfy Lord Shiva, or who follows such principles, will certainly become an atheist and be diverted from transcendental scriptural injunctions. Purport. It is sometimes seen that devotees of Lord Shiva imitate the characteristics of Lord Shiva. For example, Lord Shiva drank an ocean of poison. So some followers of Lord Shiva imitate him and try to take intoxicants like ganja, marijuana. Here the curse is that if someone follows such principles, he must become an infidel and turn against the principles of Vedic regulation. It is said that such devotees of Lord Shiva will be sakshastra paripantina, which means opposed to the conclusion of Shastra or Scripture. This is confirmed in the Padma Purana also. Lord Shiva was ordered by the Supreme Personality of Godhead to preach the impersonal or Mayavadi philosophy for a particular purpose, just as Lord Buddha preached the philosophy of voidness for particular purposes mentioned in the Shastras. Sometimes it is necessary to preach a philosophical doctrine which is against the Vedic conclusion. In the Shiva Purana, it is stated that Lord Shiva said to Parvati that in the Kali Yuga, in the body of a Brahmana, he would preach the Mayavadi philosophy. Thus, generally it is found that the worshippers of Lord Shiva are Mayavadi philosophers, Mayavadi followers. I'll read that again. Thus, generally it is found that the worshippers of Lord Shiva are Mayavadi followers. Lord Shiva himself says, Mayavadam Asat Shastram. Asat Shastra, as explained here, means the doctrine of Mayavadi impersonalism, or becoming one with the Supreme. Bhrigu Muni cursed that persons who worshipped Lord Shiva would become followers of this Mayavadi Asat Shastra. It is called Asat Shastra because the Mayavadi doctrine attempts to establish that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is impersonal. Besides that, among the worshippers of Lord Shiva, there is a section who live in devilish life. Srimad Bhagavatam and Narada Pancharatra are authorized scriptures that are considered Sat Shastra, or scriptures which lead one to the path of God realization. Asat Shastras are just the opposite. Text number 29. Those who vow to worship Lord Shiva are so foolish that they imitate him by keeping long hair on their heads. When initiated into worship of Lord Shiva, they prefer to live on wine, flesh, and other such things. Purport: indulging in wine and meat, keeping long hair on one's head, not bathing daily, and smoking ganja, marijuana, are some of the habits which are accepted by foolish creatures who do not have regulated lives. By such behavior one becomes devoid of transcendental knowledge. In the initiation into the Shiva mantra, there are mudrakakshitaka, in which it is sometimes recommended that one make his sitting place on the vagina and thus desire nirvana or dissolution of existence. In that process of worship, wine is needed, or sometimes, in place of wine, palm tree juice, which is converted into an intoxicant. This is also offered according to Shiva Agama, a scripture on the method of worshipping Lord Shiva. 30. Bhrigu Muni continued, since you blaspheme the Vedas and the Brahmanas, who are the followers of the Vedic principles, it is understood that you have already taken shelter of the doctrine of atheism. Purport: Bhrigu Muni, in cursing Nandishvara, said that not only would they be degraded as atheists because of his curse, but they had already fallen to the standard of atheism because they had blasphemed the Vedas, which are the source of human civilization. Human civilization is based on the qualitative divisions of social order, namely the intelligent class, the martial class, the productive class, and the laborer class. The Vedas provide the right direction for advancing in spiritual cultivation and economic development and regulating the principle of sense gratification so that ultimately one may be liberated from material contamination to his real state of spiritual identification. Aham Brahmasmi. As long as one is in the contamination of material existence, he changes bodies from the aquatics up to the position of Brahma, but the human form of life is the highest perfectional life in the material world. The Vedas give direction how to elevate oneself in the next life, so the Vedas are the mother for such instructions, and the Brahmanas, or persons who are in knowledge of the Vedas, are the father. Thus, if one blasphemes the Vedas and Brahmanas, naturally one goes down to the status of atheism. The exact word used in Sanskrit is Nastik, which means one who does not believe in the Vedas, but manufactures some concocted system of religion. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has said that the followers of the Buddhist system of religion are Nastikas. In order to establish his doctrine of nonviolence, Lord Buddha flatly refused to believe in the Vedas, and thus later on Shankaracharya stopped this system of religion in India and forced it to go outside India. Here it is stated, Brahmacha Ramana Pramanam. Brahma means the Vedas. Aham Brahmasmi means I am in full knowledge. The Vedic assertion is that one should think that he is Brahman, for actually he is Brahman. If Brahman or the Vedic spiritual science is condemned, and the masters of the spiritual science, the Brahmanas, are condemned, then where does human civilization stand? Bhrigu Muni says, it is not due to my cursing that you shall become atheists. You are already situated in the principle of atheism. Therefore, you are condemned. 31. The Vedas give the eternal regulative principles for auspicious advancement in human civilization, which have been rigidly followed in the past. Oh, that's annoying, sorry. The Vedas give the eternal regulative principles for auspicious advancement in human civilization, which have been rigidly followed in the past. The strong evidence of this principle is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is called Janardana, the well-wisher of all living entities. Purport. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, has claimed that he is the father of all living entities, regardless of form. There are 8,400,000 different species of life forms, and Lord Krishna claims that he is the father of all. Because the living entities are parts and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they are all sons of the Lord, and for their benefit, because they are hovering under the impression that they can lord it over material nature, the Vedas are given to them for their guidance. Therefore the Vedas are called Apaurisheya, for they are not written by any man or demigod, including the first living creature, Brahma. Brahma is not the creator or author of the Vedas. He is also one of the living beings in this material world. Therefore he does not have the power to write or speak the Vedas independently. Every living entity within this material world is subject to 4 deficiencies. He commits mistakes, he accepts one thing for another, he cheats, and he has imperfect senses. The Vedas, however, are not written by any living creature within this material world. Therefore, they are said to be Apaurisheya. No one can trace out the history of the Vedas. Of course, modern human civilization has no chronological history of the world or the universe, and it cannot present actual historical facts older than 3,000 years. But no one has traced out when the Vedas were written, because they were never written by any living being within this material world. All other systems of knowledge are defective because they have been written or spoken by men or demigods, or products of this material creation. But Bhagavad Gita is a Paurisheya, for it was not spoken by a human being or any demigod of this material creation. It was spoken by Lord Krishna, who is beyond the material creation. That is accepted by such stalwart scholars as Shankaracharya, not to speak of other acharyas such as Ramanujacharya and Madhvacharya. Shankaracharya has accepted that Narayan and Krishna are transcendental. And in Bhagavad Gita also, Lord Krishna has established, Aham sarvasya prabhavo matak sarvam pravartite. I am the origin of everything. Everything is emanated from me. This material creation, including Brahma and Shiva and all the demigods, has been created by him, for everything is emanated from him. He also says that Vedaishta sarver ahameva vedya. The purpose of all the Vedas is to understand him. He is the original Vedavit, or knower of the Vedanta, and Vedanta Krit, or compiler of the Vedas. Brahma is not the compiler of the Vedas. In the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam, it is established, Teni Brahma Hrida. The Supreme Absolute Truth, the Personality of Godhead, instructed Brahma in the Vedic knowledge through his heart. Therefore, the evidence that Vedic knowledge is free from the defects of mistakes, illusions, cheating, and imperfection is that it is spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Janardhan, and has thus been followed from time immemorial, beginning from Brahma. The Vedic religion, or the principles of the Vedas, have been followed by the highly cultured population of India since time immemorial. No one can trace out the history of Vedic religion. Therefore, it is Sanatan, and any blasphemy against the Vedas is calculated to be atheism. The Vedas are described as Setu. Do you have a dot over it? No. Setu, which means bridge. If one wants to attain his spiritual existence, one has to cross an ocean of nescience. The Vedas are the bridge to cross such a great ocean. The Vedas describe how to divide the human race into 4 divisions according to quality and working capacity. This is a very scientific system, and it is also Sanatan, for no one can trace out its history. And it has no dissolution. No one can stop the system of Varna and Ashrama, or the castes and divisions. For example, whether or not one accepts the name Brahmin, there is a class in society which is known as the intelligent class, and which is interested in spiritual understanding and philosophy. Similarly, there is a class of men who are interested in administration and in ruling others. In the Vedic system, these martially spirited men are called Kshatriyas. Similarly, everywhere there is a class of men who are interested in economic development, business, industry, and money-making. They are called Vaishyas. And there is another class who are neither intelligent nor martially spirited nor endowed with the capacity for economic development, but who simply can serve others. They are called Shudras, or the laborer class. This system is Sanatan. It comes from time immemorial, and it will continue in the same way. There is no power in the world which can stop it. Therefore, since this Sanatan Dharma system is eternal, one can elevate himself to the highest standard of spiritual life by following the Vedic principles. It is stated that formerly the sages followed this system. Therefore, to follow the Vedic system is to follow the standard etiquette of society. But the followers of Lord Shiva, who are drunkards, who are addicted to intoxicants and sex life, who do not bathe, and who smoke ganja, are against all human etiquette. The conclusion is that persons who rebel against the Vedic principles are themselves the evidence that the Vedas are authoritative, because by not following the Vedic principles, they become like animals. Such animalistic persons are themselves evidence of the supremacy of Vedic regulations. 32. By blaspheming the principles of the Vedas, which are the pure and supreme path of the saintly persons, certainly you followers of Bhutapati, Lord Shiva, will descend to the standard of atheism without a doubt. Purport. Lord Shiva is described here as Bhuta Rat. The ghost and those who are situated in the material mode of ignorance are called Bhutas. So Bhuta Rat means the leader of the creatures who are in the lowest standard of the material modes of nature. Another meaning of Bhuta is anyone who has taken birth or anything which is produced. So in that sense, Lord Shiva may be accepted as the father of this material world. Here, of course, Bhrigu Muni takes Lord Shiva as the leader of the lowest creatures. The characteristics of the lowest class of men have already been described. They do not bathe, they have long hair on their heads, and they are addicted to intoxicants. In comparison to the path followed by the followers of Bhutarat, the Vedic system is certainly excellent, for it promotes people to spiritual life as the highest eternal principle of human civilization. If one decries or blasphemes the Vedic principles, then he falls to the standard of atheism. Bhutarat or Bhutarat. The sage Maitreya said, when such cursing and counter-cursing was going on between his followers and the parties of Daksha and Bhrigu, Lord Shiva became very morose. Not saying anything, he left the arena of the sacrifice, followed by his disciples. Purport. Here, Lord Shiva's excellent character is described. In spite of the cursing and counter-cursing between the parties of Daksha and Shiva, because he is the greatest Vaishnava, he was so sober that he did not say anything. A Vaishnava is always tolerant, and Lord Shiva is considered the topmost Vaishnava. So his character, as shown in this scene, is excellent. He became morose because he knew that these people, both his men and Dakshas, were unnecessarily cursing and counter-cursing one another without any interest in the spiritual life. From his point of view, he did not see anyone as lower or higher because he is a Vaishnava. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Pandita Samadarshina, one who is perfectly learned, does not see anyone as lesser or greater because he sees everyone from the spiritual platform. Thus, the only alternative left to Lord Shiva was to leave in order to stop his follower, Nandishvara, as well as Bhrigu Muni, from cursing and counter-cursing in that way. 34. The sage Maitreya continued, O Vidura, all the progenitors of this universal population thus executed a sacrifice for thousands of years. For sacrifice is the best way to worship the Supreme Lord, Hari, the personality of Godhead. Purport. It is clearly stated here that the stalwart personalities who generate the entire population of the world are interested in satisfying the Supreme Personality of Godhead by offering sacrifices. The Lord also says in Bhagavad Gita, Bhuktaram Yagyatapasam, one may engage in performing sacrifices and severe austerities for perfection, but they are all meant to satisfy the Supreme Lord. If such activities are performed for personal satisfaction, that is called pashanda, or atheism. But when they are performed for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, that is the Vedic principle. All the assembled sages perform sacrifices for 1,000 years. 35. My dear Vidura, carrier of bows and arrows, all the demigods who were performing the sacrifice took their bath at the confluence of the Ganges and the Jamuna after completing the yajna performance. Such a bath is called Avabrita Snan. Thus, becoming purified in heart, they departed for their respective abodes. Purport. After Lord Shiva and previously Daksha left the arena of sacrifice, the sacrifice was not stopped. The sages went on for many years in order to satisfy the Supreme Lord. The sacrifice was not destroyed for want of Shiva and Daksha, and the sages went on with their activities. In other words, it may be assumed that if one does not worship the demigods, even up to Lord Shiva and Brahma, one can nevertheless satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is also confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Kamaistaiste hrita jnana prapadyante nyadevata. Persons who are impelled by lust and desire go to the demigods to derive some material benefit. Bhagavad Gita uses the very specific words, nasti buddhi, meaning persons who have lost their sense or intelligence. Only such persons care for demigods and want to derive material benefit from them. Of course, this does not mean that one should not show respect to the demigods, but there is no need to worship them. One who is honest may be faithful to the government, but he does not need to bribe the government servants. Bribery is illegal. One does not bribe a government servant, but that does not mean that he does not show him respect. Similarly, one who engages in the transcendental loving service of the Supreme Lord does not need to worship any demigod, nor does he have any tendency to show disrespect to the demigods. Elsewhere, in the Bhagavad Gita, it is stated, Ye pyanya devata bhakta yajante shadayanvita. The Lord says that anyone who worships the demigods is also worshipping him, but he is worshipping avidi purvakam, which means without following the regular principles. The regular principle is to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Worship of demigods may indirectly be worship of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but it is not regulated. By worshiping the Supreme Lord, one automatically serves all the demigods because they are parts and parcels of the whole. If one supplies water to the root of a tree, all the parts of the tree, such as the leaves and branches, are automatically satisfied. And if one supplies food to the stomach, all the limbs of the body, the hands, legs, fingers, etc., are nourished. Thus, by worshipping the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can satisfy all the demigods. But by worshipping all the demigods, one does not completely worship the Supreme Lord. Therefore, worship of the demigods is irregular, and it is disrespectful to the scriptural injunctions. In this age of Kali, it is practically impossible to perform the Devi Yajna, or sacrifices to the demigods. As such, in this age, Srimad Bhagavatam recommends Sankirtan Yajna. Yagnai Sankirtana Prayar Yajantihi Sumedasa, Bhagavatam 11.5.32. In this age, the intelligent person completes the performance of all kinds of yajnas simply by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Tasmin Tushte Jagat Tushta. When Lord Vishnu has satisfied all the demigods who are part and parcels of the Supreme Lord are satisfied. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the 4th canto, 2nd chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Daksha Curses Lord Shiva. Bravo! Bravissimo! Sadhu, sadhu. Okay, we'll take a few reflections, questions. Yes?
Yeah, 2 lessons. One is Lord Shiva walking out, so don't get involved in quarrels, stay sober, and especially in these times where people are so polarized on all levels and take sides and parties, including devotees, just stay equiposed and walk out if necessary. And then the sages continue the yagya. No matter what, we just continue with the Sankirtan.
Sadhu, sadhu. Yes.
I like the example of government and government officials. Like we are faithful to the government, but we must not try to bribe the officials. It means when we are bribing the officials, we are asking for something which is not meant to be done.
Yes. Nice analogy. Pukitamas? Yes.
It's a very, very basic elementary question, but I want to confirm. From what we read earlier, Brahma welcomed Daksha because he was the president of the assembly, so as an etiquette he welcomed Daksha.
Brahma welcomed Daksha, you said? I couldn't hear you.
Brahma welcomed Daksha, it
Yes.
was stated. So is it because he's the president of the assembly?
Yes.
So okay.
It was an official proceeding and that was his duty.
And Lord Shiva, because he's superior to Daksha, so he didn't have to, and he was not officially at the post, so he didn't have to do
He's
anything.
totally chill. He doesn't Yeah, Lord Shiva is in a superior position. Yes.
I know of one occasion where, I believe it was in Geneva, or no, in a different city, where the mayor of the city came to see Prabhupada, and the protocol would be that you stand up, and Prabhupada didn't stand up, and so everybody was a little bewildered. They were a little confused, but Prabhupada was just very courteous, but he didn't get up because there was no requirement for him to get up because of his superior position. And it went well at the end, but a few people were a little surprised.
Yes. I was just reading how...
Just that there are different types of protocols for different levels of...
Yeah, so when Krishna greeted the Pandavas, he offered obeisances to the feet of Yudhishthira. He accepted an embrace, and he embraced back Arjuna. He also allowed Nakula and Sahadev to offer obeisances to him. And Bhima, also he was accepted some etiquette on the equal level. And then there's a way that Prabhupada, I heard also that he's very much aware of how he was perceived, and it was important because he is an ambassador for the spiritual world and for the parampara. I think it was Yogeshwara or somebody else from Europe told how once Prabhupada was at a program and afterwards he was waiting for the ride to come, and they were out on the sidewalk, and the devotee who was staying with Prabhupada, standing with him, said, would you like to sit there? There was a sidewalk bistro. And Prabhupada said, what is that place? And he said, oh, it's a bistro. They serve snacks, coffee, and stuff like that. And Prabhupada said, no, I cannot sit there. Because he didn't want to be seen, sitting there, because he was aware that every move he made was being calculated. So he was very careful. Any other thoughts, points, questions? Anybody outside? Only the trees echoed in response to the aggrieved Vaisesika Das. Chapter 3, yes.
His Holiness Gaur Govinda Maharaj was traveling with a servant in long-haul flight, and then the stewardess came, and the servant wanted to order water or this or that, and Maharaj said, no, we don't take anything. And then he told to the servant, we don't know who she is, we don't know where she come from. We're not touching anything here.
Gopal?
I went into the room, and then Bhaktarine was just appreciating the fact how you had mentioned how any psychological or nuance issues are dealt with in the Bhagavatam. So we see this story as such an example of etiquette, of different things like that. So I think I appreciate that. We're learning so many different nuanced situations. Respect and like this. It's all there, present in the Bhagavatam.
Isn't it though? Hearing the story, it's so unseemly, the way Daksha rises up in anger against Shiva, and the way the curses and counter curses come, and we're at a distance watching it all unfold, and because we're watching it and experiencing it from a distance, thinking, oh no, don't do that, there's an impression we get that whenever something like this comes up, it's the prototypical situation. In fact, there's so many situations like it in the world even right now where people are at loggerheads, probably used that word earlier, and you're just thinking like, could you just loosen up a little bit? Couldn't you find any common ground? I know during political campaigns, everyone's like, you're bad, boom, boom, boom. And then an interviewer will say, could you say one good thing about the other person? And I'm like, oh, all right. And they try, give some half-hearted effort. But we expend all our sense of wanting to fight with people by hearing the story. Nested stories. Yes?
I just remember Hanumat Prashik Swami was telling that these stories are actually applied to us in ISKCON setting, and especially for this story, he had a whole, I forgot the details, but it was the temple president's daughter getting married for, I don't know, whoever department
Yeah, he would
head.
temporize the stories and make them like, oh yeah, that's us. Yeah. Hanumapeshek Swami. Never a dull moment. He's a real genius. Chapter 3 talks between Lord Shiva and Sati. Everyone okay outside? Haribo! Maitreya continued. In this manner, the tension between the father-in-law and son-in-law, Daksha and Lord Shiva, continued for a considerably long period. Purport. The previous chapter has already explained that Vidura questioned the sage Maitreya as to the cause of the misunderstanding between Lord Shiva and Daksha. Another question is why the strife between Daksha and his son-in-law caused Sati to destroy her body. The chief reason for Sati's giving up her body was that her father Daksha began another sacrificial performance to which Lord Shiva was not invited at all. Generally, when a sacrifice is performed, although each and every sacrifice is intended to pacify the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu, all the demigods, especially Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva and the other principal demigods, such as Indra and Chandra, are invited, and they take part. It is said that unless all the demigods are present, no sacrifice is complete. In the tension between the father-in-law and son-in-law, Daksha began another yajna performance to which Lord Shiva was not invited. Daksha was the chief progenitor employed by Lord Brahma, and he was a son of Brahma, so he had a high position and was also very proud. When Lord Brahma appointed Daksha as the chief of all the Prajapatis, the progenitors of population, Daksha became very much puffed up. Purport. Although he was envious and was inimical towards Lord Shiva, Daksha was appointed the chief of all Prajapatis. That was the cause of his excessive pride. When a man becomes too proud of his material possessions, he can perform any disastrous act. So Daksha acted out of false prestige. That is described in this chapter. Daksha began a sacrifice named Vajapeya, and he became excessively confident of his support by Lord Brahma. He then performed another great sacrifice called Brihaspati Sava. Purport. In the Vedas, it is prescribed that before performing a Brihaspati Sava sacrifice, one should perform the sacrifice named Vajapeya. While performing these sacrifices, however, Daksha neglected great devotees like Lord Shiva. According to Vedic scriptures, the demigods are eligible to participate in yajnas and share the oblations, but he wanted to avoid them. All sacrifices are intended to pacify Lord Vishnu, but Lord Vishnu includes all his devotees. Brahma, Lord Shiva, and the other demigods are all obedient servants of Lord Vishnu. Therefore, Lord Vishnu is never satisfied without them. But Daksha, being puffed up with his power, wanted to deprive Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva of participation in the sacrifice. Understanding that if one satisfies Vishnu, it is not necessary to satisfy his followers. I'll read that again, wrong cadence, sorry. Brahma, Lord Shiva, and the other demigods are all obedient servants of Lord Vishnu. Therefore, Lord Vishnu is never satisfied without them. But Daksha, being puffed up with his power, wanted to deprive Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva of participation in the sacrifice, understanding that if one satisfies Vishnu, it is not necessary to satisfy his followers. But that is not the process. Vishnu wants his followers to be satisfied first. Lord Krishna says, Mad Bhakta Pujabhyadika, the worship of my devotees is better than worship of myself. Similarly, in the Shiva Purana, it is stated that the best mode of worship is to offer oblations to Vishnu. But better than that is to worship the devotees of Krishna. Thus, Daksha's determination to neglect Lord Shiva in the sacrifices was not fitting. It reminds me of the story of Bahulashva and Shrutadev. When Lord Krishna decided to go visit both of them, they were both pure devotees, and they had different stations in life. One was very poor, and the other was wealthy king. And the sages went with him on his chariot. And although they were going at the, I forget it said speed of the mind maybe, on his chariot, still Krishna was able to make eye contact with everyone along the road. Everyone along the road. And when he arrived at the juncture where he met Shrutadev and Bahulasva, they both greeted him. And then Krishna expanded himself so he was available for both of them at the same time. But he didn't just expand himself, he also expanded all the sages. So the sages and Krishna went to the house of Shrutadev and Bahulasva. But what's related to this purport? Tell me again, who was the king and who was the pauper? He went to Bahulasva's house and then he went to Shrutadev's. He was out of their house simultaneously. So Shrutadev was glorifying Krishna in front of all the sages. And Krishna stopped him partway through his glorification and he said, too much. Don't glorify me so much in front of the sages. Glorify them. It's very striking because Krishna was very aware of the fact the sages were there and he wanted the worship to go through them. Isn't that interesting? Kind of relates, right? Text number 4. While the sacrifice was being performed, many brahmarshis, great sages, ancestral demigods, and other demigods, their wives all very nicely decorated with ornaments, attended from different parts of the universe. Purport: in any auspicious ceremony, such as a marriage ceremony, sacrificial ceremony, or puja ceremony, it is auspicious for married women to decorate themselves very nicely with ornaments, fine clothing, and cosmetics. These are auspicious signs, and many heavenly women assembled with their husbands, the Devarshis, demigods, and Rajarishis. In that great sacrifice named Brihaspati Sava, it is specifically mentioned in this verse that they approached with their husbands, for when a woman is decorated nicely, her husband becomes more cheerful. The nice decorations, ornaments, and dress of the wives of the demigods and sages, and the cheerfulness of the demigods and sages themselves were all auspicious signs for the ceremony. The chaste lady Sati, the daughter of Daksha, heard the heavenly denizens flying in the sky, conversing about the great sacrifice being performed by her father. When she saw that from all directions the beautiful wives of the heavenly denizens, their eyes very beautifully glittering, were near her residence and were going to the sacrifice dressed in fine clothing and ornamented with earrings and necklaces with lockets, she approached her husband, the master of the Bhutas, in great anxiety, and spoke as follows. Purport: it appears that the residence of Lord Shiva was not on this planet, but was somewhere in outer space. Otherwise, how could Sati see the airplanes coming from different directions toward this planet and hear the passengers talking about the great sacrifice being performed by Daksha? Sati is described here as Dakshayani because she was the daughter of Daksha. The mention of Upadevara refers to inferior demigods like the Gandharvas, Kinnaras, and Urugas, who are not exactly demigods, but are between the demigods and human beings. They were also coming in planes. The word Swa Nilayab Yashe indicates that they were passing right near her residential quarters. The dresses and bodily features of the wives of the heavenly denizens are very nicely described here. Their eyes moved, their earrings and other ornaments glittered and glared. Their dresses were the nicest possible, and all of them had special lockets on their necklaces. Each woman was accompanied by her husband. Thus they looked so beautiful that Sati, Dakshayani, was impelled to dress similarly and go to the sacrifice with her husband. That is the natural inclination of a woman. Sati said, "My dear Lord Shiva, your father-in-law is now executing great sacrifices, and all the demigods, having been invited by him, are going there. If you desire, we may also go." Purport: Sati knew of the tension between her father and her husband But still she expressed to her husband, Lord Shiva, that since such sacrifices were going on at her father's house, and so many demigods were going, she also desired to go. But she could not express her willingness directly, and so she told her husband that if he desired to go, then she could also accompany him. In other words, she submitted her desire very politely to her husband. 9. I think that all my sisters must have gone to this great sacrificial ceremony with their husbands just to see their relatives. I also desire to decorate myself with the ornaments given to me by my father, and go there with you to participate in that assembly. Purport: it is a woman's nature to want to decorate herself with ornaments and nice dresses, and accompany her husband to social functions, meet friends and relatives, and enjoy life in that way. This propensity is not unusual because woman is the basic principle of material enjoyment. Therefore, in Sanskrit, the word woman is stri, which means one who expands the field of material enjoyment. In the material world, there is an attraction between woman and man. This is the arrangement of conditional life. A woman attracts a man, and in that way the scope of material activities involving house, wealth, children, and friendship increases. And thus, instead of decreasing one's material demands, one becomes entangled in material enjoyment. Lord Shiva, however, is different. Therefore his name is Shiva. He is not at all attracted by material enjoyment, although his wife Sati was the daughter of a very great leader and was given to him by the request of Brahma. Lord Shiva was reluctant, but Sati, as a woman, the daughter of a king, wanted enjoyment. She wanted to go to her father's house, just as her other sisters might have done, and meet them and enjoy social life. Here she specifically indicated that she would decorate herself with the ornaments given by her father. She did not say that she would decorate herself with the ornaments given by her husband, because her husband was callous about all such matters. He did not know how to decorate his wife and take part in social life, because he was always in ecstasy with thoughts of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. According to the Vedic system, a daughter is given a sufficient dowry at the time of her marriage. So Sati was also given a dowry by her father, and ornaments were included. It is also the custom that the husband gives some ornaments, but here it is particularly mentioned that her husband, being materially almost nothing, could not do so. Therefore she wanted to decorate herself with the ornaments given by her father. It was fortunate for Sati that Lord Shiva did not take the ornaments from his wife and spend them for ganja, because those who imitate Lord Shiva in smoking ganja exploit everything from household affairs. They take all their wives' property and spend on smoking, intoxication, and similar other activities. What to speak of in the text itself, then Prabhupada also gives such enumeration of the depraved activities of people. Where's the ornaments? Up in smoke. Such a degraded activity. That is, people become involved in intoxication. Text 10. My sisters, the sisters of my mother and their husbands and other affectionate relatives must be assembled there. So if I go, I shall be able to see them, and I shall be able to see the flapping flags and the performance of the sacrifice by the great sages. For these reasons, my dear husband, I am very much anxious to go. Purport. As stated before, the tension between the father-in-law and the son-in-law persisted for a considerable time. So Sati had not gone to her father's house for a long while. Thus she was very anxious to go to her father's house, particularly because on that occasion her sisters and their husbands and her mother's sisters would be there. As is natural for a woman, she wanted to dress equally to her other sisters and also be accompanied by her husband. She did not, of course, want to go alone. 11. Although this cosmic manifestation is a wonderful creation of the it was hyphenated and split. Although this cosmic manifestation is a wonderful creation of the interaction of the three modes of material nature, or the external energy of the Supreme Lord, the truth is fully known to you. Yet I am a poor woman, and, as you know, I am not conversant with the truth. Therefore, I wish to see my birthplace once more. Purport. Dakshayani Sati knew very well that her husband, Lord Shiva, was not very much interested in the glaring manifestation of the material world, which is caused by the interaction of the three modes of nature. Therefore, she addressed her husband as Aja, one who has transcended the bondage of birth and death, or one who has realized his eternal position. She stated, the illusion of accepting the perverted reflection, the material or cosmic manifestation, to be real is not present in you because you are self-realized. For you, the attraction of social life and the consideration that someone is father, someone is mother, and someone is sister, which are illusory relationships, is already over. But because I am a poor woman, I am not so advanced in transcendental realization. Therefore, naturally, these appear to me as real. Only less intelligent persons accept this perverted reflection of the spiritual world to be real. Those who are under the spell of the external energy accept this manifestation to be fact, whereas those who are advanced in spiritual realization know that it is illusion. Actual reality is elsewhere, in the spiritual world. But as far as I'm concerned, Sati said, I do not have much knowledge about self-realization. I am poor because I do not know the actual facts. I am attracted by my birthplace, and I want to see it. One who has attraction for his birthplace, for his body, and for other such items mentioned in the Bhagavatam, is considered to be like an ass or a cow. Sati might have heard all this many times from her husband, Lord Shiva, but because she was a woman, Yoshit, she still hankered after the same material objects of affection. The word Yoshit means one who is enjoyed. Therefore, woman is called Yoshit. In spiritual advancement, association with Yoshit is always restricted, because if one is like a play doll in the hands of Yoshit, then all his spiritual advancement is at once stopped. It is said, those who are just like playthings in the hands of a woman cannot make any advancement in spiritual realization. 12. O never born, O blue-throated one, not only my relatives but also other women dressed in nice clothes and decorated with ornaments are going there with their husbands and friends. Just see how their flocks of white airplanes have made the entire sky beautiful. Purport. Here Lord Shiva is addressed as Abhava, which means one who is never born, although generally he is known as Bhava, one who is born. Actually, Rudra, Lord Shiva, is born from the eyes of Brahma, who is called Swayambhuva, because he is not born of any human being or material creature, but is born directly from the lotus flower which grows from the abdomen of Vishnu. When Lord Shiva is addressed here as Abhava, this may be taken to mean that one who has never felt material miseries. Sati wanted to impress upon her husband that even those who were not related to her father were also going, to say nothing of herself, who was intimately related with him. Lord Shiva is addressed here as blue-throated. Lord Shiva drank an ocean of poison and kept it in his throat, not swallowing it or allowing it to go down to his stomach, thus his throat became blue. Since then he has been known as Nilakanta, or blue-throated. The reason that Lord Shiva drank an ocean of poison was for others' benefit. When the ocean was churned by the demigods and the demons, the churning at first produced poison. So because the poisonous ocean might have affected others who were not so advanced, Lord Shiva drank all the ocean water. In other words, he could drink such a great amount of poison for others' benefit. And now, since his wife was personally requesting him to go to her father's house, even if he did not wish to give that permission, he should do so out of his great kindness. O best of the demigods, how can the body of a daughter remain undisturbed when she hears that some festive event is taking place in her father's house? Even though you may be considering that I have not been invited, there is no harm if one goes to the house of his friend, husband, spiritual master, or spirit or father without invitation. O immortal Shiva, please be kind towards me and fulfill my desire. You have accepted me as half of your body. Therefore, please show kindness toward me and accept my request. The great sage Maitreya said, Lord Shiva, the deliverer of the hill Kailas, thus being addressed by his dear wife, replied smilingly, although at the same time he remembered the malicious, heart-piercing speeches delivered by Daksha before the guardians of the universal affairs. He replied smilingly. Purport. When Lord Shiva heard from his wife about Daksha, the psychological effect was that he immediately remembered the strong words which were spoken against him in the assembly of guardians of the universe. And remembering those words, hey, remember that. That happened last year. What is it? Psychological effect. It really sticks with you. There's a verse Lord Krishna speaks to Uddhava in the 11th canto when he said there's nothing as painful as sharp words spoken by an ignorant person. He said it pierces the heart like a spear. Really sticks with you. He said trying to control the mind after an ignorant person speaks derisively, sharp words, he said it's practically impossible. That's that whole story about the Avanti Brahmin is there. Because everyone derided him. They urinated on him. They tied him up. They made fun of him. They threw things at him. And he just tolerated. He said, this is all due to my past mischief. How's everyone? Okay. How's the temperature? It feels like it's becoming wintry. Or is it just because I'm under a fan going 1,000,000 miles an hour? When Lord Shiva heard from his wife about Daksha, the psychological effect was that he immediately remembered the strong words which were spoken against him in the assembly of the guardians of the universe. And remembering those words, he was sorry at heart, although to please his wife, he smiled. In Bhagavad Gita it is said that a liberated person is always in mental equilibrium in both the distress and the happiness of this material world. Therefore, the question may now be raised why a liberated personality like Lord Shiva was so unhappy because of the words of Daksha. The answer is given by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Lord Shiva is Atma Rama, or situated in complete self-realization. But because he is the incarnation in charge of the material mode of ignorance, tamoguna, he is sometimes affected by the pleasure and pain of the material world. The difference between the pleasure and pain of this material world and that of the spiritual world is that in the spiritual world the effect is qualitatively absolute. Therefore, one may feel sorry in the absolute world, but the manifestation of so-called pain is always full of bliss. For instance, once Lord Krishna in his childhood was chastised by his mother, Yashoda, and Lord Krishna cried. But although he shed tears from his eyes, this is not to be considered a reaction of the mode of ignorance, for the incident was full of transcendental pleasure. When Krishna was playing in so many ways, sometimes it appeared that he caused distress to the gopis, but actually such dealings were full of transcendental bliss. That is the difference between the material and spiritual worlds. The spiritual world, where everything is pure, is pervertedly reflected in this material world. Since everything in the spiritual world is absolute, in the spiritual varieties of apparent pleasure and pain, there is no other perception than eternal bliss. Whereas in the material world, because everything is contaminated by the modes of material nature, there are feelings of pleasure and pain. Therefore, because Lord Shiva, although a fully self-realized person, was in charge of the material mode of ignorance, he felt sorrow. Text 16. The great Lord replied, My dear beautiful wife, you have said that one may go to a friend's house without being invited. And this is true, provided such a friend does not find fault with the guest because of bodily identification, and thereby become angry towards him. Purport. Lord Shiva could foresee that as soon as Sati reached her father's house, her father Daksha, being too puffed up because of bodily identification, would be angry at her presence. And although she was innocent and faultless, he would be mercilessly angry towards her. He warned that since her father was too puffed up by his material possessions, he would be angry, and this would be intolerable for her. Therefore it was better that she not go. This fact was already experienced by Lord Shiva, because although Lord Shiva was faultless, Daksha cursed him in so many harsh words. And that brings us to the cow break.